The American Revolution did not overturn the social order, but it did create changes in social customs, political institutions, and ideas about society and government. Some of these changes were the separation of the church and state in some places and the abolition of slavery in the North, written political constitutions, and a shift in political power from the eastern seaboard toward the frontier. The Articles of Confederation was unable to exercise real authority, although it did successfully deal with the Western land issues. The Confederation had many weaknesses in handling foreign policy, the Shays' Rebellion, and some commerce, and it spurred a movement to alter the Articles. Instead of redoing the Articles, the delegates to the Constitutional Convention made a permanent charter for a whole new government. After many compromises, the convention produced a plan that provided for a central government, a strong executive, and protection for property, while still upholding Republican principles and state rights. The Federalists that were for the Constitution generally represented more wealthier and commercial forces, which also frightened other groups who feared that the new government would undermine their rights and their interests. The Federalists had many strong opponents from anti-Federalists in Virginia and New York, but through effective organization and argument, they succeeded in getting the Constitution ratified. The Federalists also promised to incorporate a Bill of Rights into the document. The fledgling government faced considerable difficulties about its durability, especially since traditional political theory held that large-scale republics were bound to fail. But Washington brought credibility to the new government, while his cabinet, led by Alexander Hamilton, strengthened its political and economic foundations. The first achievements of the government were the Bill of Rights and Hamilton's financial system. Through good leadership, Hamilton carried out his program of funding to the national debt, assuming state debts, imposing customs and excess taxes, and establishing a Bank of the United States. The bank was the most controversial part of Hamilton's program because it raised basic constitutional issues. The opposers of the bank, from Jefferson and his followers, reflected more fundamental political disagreements about republicanism, economics, federal power, and foreign policy. As the French Revolution evolved from moderation to radicalism, it intensified the ideological divisions between the pro-French Jeffersonians and the pro-British Hamiltonians. Washington's neutrality proclamation angered Republicans who wanted America to aid revolutionary France. Washington's policy was sorely tested by the British, who routinely violated American neutrality. In order to avoid war, George Washington endorsed the conciliatory Jayes Treaty, further outraging the Republicans in France. After the humiliating XYZ affair, the United States came to the brink of war with France, but Adams sacrificed his political popularity and divided his party by negotiating peace. These foreign policy disagreements embittered domestic politics. Federalists passed the Alien and Sedition Act, to which Jefferson and Madison responded with the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. The ideological conflicts of the early republic culminated in the bitter election of 1800 between Adams and Jefferson. Despite the fierce rhetoric of the campaign, the Revolution of 1800 demonstrated that the infant republic could peacefully transfer power from one party to another. The election of 1800 also signaled the decline of the Conservative Federalist Party, which proved unable to change to the democratic future of the American politics. Jefferson, the political theorist, came to Washington determined to restore what he saw as the original American revolutionary ideals and to implement his Republican principles of limited and frugal government. But Jefferson, the practical politician, had to compromise many of these goals, thereby moderating the Republican Federalist ideological conflict. The sharpest political conflicts occurred over the judiciary, where John Marshall worked effectively to enshrine the principles of judicial review and a strong federal government. Against his original intentions, Jefferson himself also enhanced federal power by waging war against the Barbary pirates and by his dramatic purchase of Louisiana from Napoleon. The Louisiana Purchase was Jefferson's first greatest success. Actually, it was his greatest success, increasing national unity and pointing to America's long-term future in the West. But in the short term, the vast geographical expansions fostered schemes like Aaron Burr's to break the West away from the United States. Nevertheless, Jefferson became increasingly entangled in the horrific European wars between Napoleonic France and Britain, as both great powers obstructed American trade and violated freedom from the seas. Jefferson's successor, James Madison, soon stumbled into the diplomatic trap set by Napoleon, and Western war hawks hoping to acquire Canada whooped the United States into a war with Britain in 1812. The Americans had high hopes of conquering Canada in the War of 1812, but their strategy and efforts were badly flawed, and before long, British and Canadian forces had thrown the United States on the defensive. The Americans fared somewhat better in naval warfare, but by 1814 the British had burned Washington and were threatening New Orleans. The Treaty of Ghent ended the war in a stalemate that solved none of the original issues, but Americans counted the war a success and increasingly turned away from European affairs and toward isolationism. The era of good feelings was soon threatened by the Panic of 1819, caused largely by excessive land speculation and unstable banks. An even more serious threat came from the first major sectional dispute over slavery, which was postponed but not really resolved by the Missouri Compromise of 1820. Under Chief Justice John Marshall, the Supreme Court further enhanced its role as a major force upholding a powerful national government and conservative defense of property rights. Nationalism also led to a more assertive American foreign policy. Andrew Jackson's military adventures in Spanish Florida resulted in the succession of that territory to the U.S. Americans' fears of European intervention in Latin America encouraged Monroe and John Quincy Adams to lay down the Monroe Doctrine. Beginning in the 1820s, a powerful movement celebrating the common person and promoting the new democracy transformed the earlier elitist character of American politics. The controversial election of the Yankee sophisticate John Quincy Adams in 1824 angered the followers of Andrew Jackson. Jackson's sweeping presidential victory in 1828 represented the political triumph of the new democracy, including the spoils-rich political machines that thrived in the new environment. Jackson's simple, popular ideas and rough-hewn style reinforced the growing belief that any ordinary person could hold public office. The Tariff of Abominations and the nullification crisis with South Carolina revealed a growing sectionalism and anxiety about slavery that ran up against Jackson's fierce nationalism. Jackson exercised the powers of the presidency against his opponents, particularly Calhoun and Clay. He made the Bank of the United States a symbol of evil financial power and killed it after a bitter political fight. Destroying the bank reinforced Jacksonian hostility to concentrated and elite-dominated financial power, but also left the United States without any effective financial system. Jackson's presidency also focused on issues of Western expansion, pursuing paths of civilization. Native Americans of the Southeast engaged in extensive agricultural and educational development, but pressure from white settlers and from the state governments proved overwhelming, and Jackson finally supported the forced removal of all southeastern Indians to Oklahoma among the Trail of Tears. In Texas, American settlers successfully rebelled against Mexico and declared their independence. Jackson recognized the Texas Republic, but because of the slavery controversy, he refused its application for annexation to the United States. Jackson's political foes soon formed themselves into the Whig Party, but in 1836 they lost to his hand-picked successor, Van Buren. Jackson's ill-considered economic policies came home to roost under the unlucky Van Buren as the country plunged into a serious depression following the Panic of 1837. The Whigs used these economic troubles and the political hoopla of the new mass democratic process to elect their own hero in 1840, following the path of making a Western aristocrat into a democratic symbol. The Whig victory signaled the emergence of a new two-party system in which the two parties' genuine philosophical differences and somewhat different constituencies proved less important than their widespread popularity and shared roots in the new American democratic spirit. The youthful American Republic expanded dramatically on the frontier in the early 19th century. Frontier life was often crude and hard on the pioneers, especially women. Westward moving pioneers often ruthlessly exploited the environment, exhausting the soil and exterminating wildlife. Other changes altered the character of American societies and its workforce. Old cities expanded, and new cities sprang up in the wilderness. Irish and German immigrants poured into the country in the 1830s and 1840s, and the Irish in particular aroused nativist hostility because of their Roman Catholic faith. The most far-reaching economic advances from before the Civil War occurred in agriculture and transportation. The early railroads, despite many obstacles, gradually spread their tentacles across the country. Foreign trade remained only a small part of the American economy, but changing technology gradually created growing economic links to Europe. By the early 1860s, the telegraph, railroad, and steamship had gone far toward replacing older means of travel and communication like the canals, clipper ships, stagecoach, and pony express. The new means of transportation and distribution laid the foundations for a continental market economy. The new national economy created a pattern of sectional specialization and altered the traditional economic functions of the family. There was growing concern over the class differences spawned by industrialization, especially in the cities. But the general growth of opportunities and increased standard of living made America a magnetic land of opportunity to many people at home and abroad. In early 19th century America, movements of moral and religious reform accompanied the democratization of politics and the creation of a national market economy. After a period of growing rationalism in religion, a new wave of revivals beginning about 1800 swept out of the West and effected great change not only in religious life but also in other areas of society. Women were especially prominent in these developments, becoming a major presence in the churches and discovering in reform movements an outlet for energies that were often stifled in masculinized political and economic life. Among the first areas to benefit from the reform impulse was education. The public elementary school movement gained strength, while a few women made their way into still tradition-bound colleges. Women were also prominent in movements for improved treatment of the mentally ill, peace, temperance, and other causes. By the 1840s, some women also began to agitate for their own rights, including suffrage. The movement for women's rights, closely linked to the anti-slavery crusade, gained adherents even while it met strong obstacles and vehement opposition. American culture was still quite weak in theoretical sciences and the fine arts, but a vigorous national literature blossomed after the War of 1812. In New England, the literary Renaissance was closely linked to the philosophy of transcendentalism,